This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm David McDonald.
I'm Nate Blyton.
And I'm Sam Merciers.
And this week on the show, we are joined by Chris Belt of the Accidental Music Festival. Chris lives in New York, but presents a festival of new music in Orlando, where I live. And so I'll be very curious to ask him about how that happened. But Chris is also a guitarist and composer. And how long have you been in New York, Chris?
About 2 years, just over 2 years. We moved up here. My wife is an oboist, and she moved up here for graduate school. So we started the festival 5 years ago, and that's why we keep presenting it down there. I hope I didn't,
right.
like, you're going to kick me off the show now. I've said answered the one question you had for me.
Yeah, that was it. That was the one question. And that's going to do it for this week's SoundNotion. Thank you all so much for being with us. You can find us at soundnotion.tv/SN. Anyway, so tell us about Accidental Music Festival. We were talking about this before you joined the call. It seems though it would be difficult to accidentally start a music festival. So tell us about how you either accidentally or deliberately started the Accidental Music Festival.
Sure. So it started in 2011. A good friend of mine, John Alvarez, a composer who he used to live in Orlando, now he's dead. He was a great friend of mine, one of my best friends. We started the festival together. We were looking for ways to premiere new pieces. He had just written this colossal work for his master's thesis at FSU. He studied with Vladislav Kubik up there, and Stella Sung when he was in Orlando. Anyway, so he'd written this huge piece called In the Beginning, and it's a piece for big band and electronics.
Wow.
Very dense, very crazy, very loud, like the loudest thing I've ever heard in a concert setting. Anyway, so we're looking for ways to do that, and we decided, let's apply for a grant, see if we can get some money and put this thing together. Well, we didn't get the grant, but we'd already booked everybody to play his piece and kind of blown the idea up in our minds and invited a bunch of other composers that we knew to present pieces and improvisers to come and perform. And it just seemed to be happening at the right time, where there were some other presenters that were doing stuff all within a couple of days of the events that we'd organized. So we just put it all under one umbrella, and Matt Gorney, he's a concert presenter with a group called Civic Minded 5. He just said in the middle of a conversation, he's like, oh, I mean, you got these concerts you guys are doing, and we're doing these concerts here. It's like you got an accidental music festival. It was just, it just captured exactly how it came together. And we got a little musical pun in there, so that's why the name stuck.
Yeah.
But it's changed shape a lot over the years. Like that first year, the reason it came together as Accidental Music Festival is we did 11 consecutive nights of events. We did 1 or 2 events, and there was educational programming and film screenings and open rehearsals, concerts, improvisation, workshops, all that stuff. And that's how it was able to come together. But now it doesn't really resemble that format at all. It's very different.
Right.
So anyway, that's how we got started 5 years ago.
That's pretty exciting. So I'm curious. I've lived in Orlando for we overlapped very briefly, you and I. I've lived in Orlando for about 3 years, and the cultural scene of Orlando is obviously dominated by a lot of very kind of watered down mainstream culture, and there's not a lot of weird culture going on in Orlando, and we do this show on a mostly weekly basis and talk about interesting concerts and interesting music, and most of the stuff we talk about ends up happening in a pretty narrowly defined set of cities, and there's a lot going on in the American Northeast, and there's a lot going on in the American West, and down here in the Southeast there's not as much. And so I wonder what your experience is presenting some more adventurous fare in that kind of cultural context.
Well, I think what you're saying, I totally get it. As I lived in Orlando for 10 years, and before that I lived in the suburbs of Tampa. So it was definitely the case that it was hard to come by more adventurous cultural experiences. However, they have always been there. It's kind of rare. It had been few and far between. But something happened in 2010 and 11. I don't know. It's not that it was a critical mass, but maybe just the minimum required dose or whatever, and something catalyzed this growth, and a ton of stuff happened. Not just in Orlando, but I'll stay with Orlando and just explain what happened there. So 2011, Accidental Music Festival started. We did a Kickstarter campaign that raised like $6,000 with 130-something backers. And if you go, you can see the video that I made. I mean, it's a piece of crap. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. But people, like, gathered around it because there was some sense of urgency and desire for that. Collide Contemporary Music Series started around that same time. They did one event in 2010, but it was like a composer workshop or something that they called it. It was basically the same thing that they do now, but just all in one day. But they really got started in 2011. Central Florida Composers Forum got started in 2011. New Score Chamber Orchestra got started in 2011. That's the first permanent new music ensemble based out of Orlando. All that stuff happened. Then you look at Fast Forward Austin, got started in 2011. Ecstatic Music Festival in New York, 2011.
Wow.
There are other examples, but for some reason that was like a really big year. Yeah, 2010 and 11 is a big changes for afoot. So in terms of my experience presenting it, there have been ups and downs. Like the first year, with no frame of reference, everything was a smash. If 5 people came to a screening of an opera production that we had like a DVD of, it was amazing. Like, I can't believe even 5 people came to this. And then like our big concert where we premiered in the beginning a piece for big band and electronics, and we did another piece for big band and then another piece for chamber orchestra. There's like 150 people at the Timucua White House, so it was like packed, totally packed. So it felt like a smash. Then the next year,
the White House, if you're not familiar with the area, seats about 150 people, probably a little less.
Yeah.
So it was a little tight.
It was tight. It was amazing energy, and everybody felt like, wow, this is something new and exciting, and so we had this big head of steam, and I'm like, next year we're going to make this thing like 10 times bigger. Well, that was a mistake, to think that we were going to, reach another order of magnitude when I haven't been to business school. So I'm like a guitarist by training and a failed entrepreneur since I was like 12 years old, when I was in a punk band and we put on concerts and put out records and stuff, which I probably still have 500 copies of every album I've ever released.
Right.
Anyway, but yeah, so presenting the second year, we shot the moon. We brought an orchestra from Mexico.
Wow.
Like an entire orchestra, the Symphonic Orchestra of Guanajuato. They're the resident orchestra at Cervantino Festival, which you guys don't know, that's like one of the biggest festivals in the Americas. It's huge. Like 1 million people go to it. It's a month long in Guanajuato, Mexico. So we brought them, and they did 3 concerts, and it was like 75 musicians, 10 support staff, and then we had soloists that came from Europe. So I got 90-something people through customs. It was completely insane. It was just way more than we should have done. We just, barely lucked out in terms of being able to finance that. And we only had like 100 people at each show. So it was kind of a disappointment for them in that sense. So, and a disappointment for me, but it helped me realize, like, I don't need to shoot for 1,000 people to come to a contemporary music concert. And that was where I started to crystallize the idea of what I'm trying to do now, which is look for artists that I can bring in of the highest possible quality, where I think I can sell like 200 to 300 tickets. And I think with the combination of ticket sales, private donors, and grants, and like selling beer, that we're able to kind of sustain that and add to the quality of life of like really good musicians, give them, you know, another place that they can come and play that we're trying to establish as a foothold for routing tours, you know, to make Orlando a hub for the contemporary classical and creative music scenes, and do something where I don't lose my shirt. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
So what have you learned through doing this? You know, you mentioned that you have no business training, but you're certainly one of many musicians that are now trying to do this kind of entrepreneurial project without any of that background. Yeah. And now that you've created something in 2011 that has lasted at least to 2015 so far, what have you learned that if somebody else were interested in starting something like Accidental Music Festival where they live in, you know, Florence, Alabama, or something like that?
I was thinking that exact same thing.
By the way, Sam lives in Florence, Alabama. That was the joke. So, if someone were interested in starting such a thing somewhere else, what would you tell them?
Let's see. There are a lot of factors. I've learned a lot, and I would say don't be afraid to ask for stuff. That's the most important thing I think that you can do. So you get this idea, sketch it out, plan what it is that you want to accomplish, you know, all of that goal setting and stuff like that. But then once you have that and you're just one person and then you're in a place where there's no infrastructure for contemporary classical music, or it doesn't seem like there is, just start asking people for stuff. One thing that I did this year, I made a list of like, okay, who do I think are the most influential people related to the contemporary classical or new music, or can we come up with a friggin' name for this this movement or whatever that's happening that we can all agree on? Like, anyway, modern classical, contemporary classical, new music, indie classical. That's my least favorite.
I don't like that one. Yeah,
hate it.
We spent a lot of time on the show ripping the indie classical thing. I think really indie classical mostly just refers to Nico Muhly.
Yeah, pretty much just the New Amsterdam record scene,
right?
Which is really good. I mean, those guys, they're awesome. I've been to a bunch of their shows, but I just hate the word indie so much that I hate dragging it into what anybody's doing.
Contemporary art music.
Contemporary art music. Art music, I think, is a great term. Mm-hmm. We gotta get some polling data. That's the thing. Nobody in we need a.
I think Franco Terry has proposed non-pop.
So what was I saying? There's no. Okay, yeah. So I made this list. This year I decided, okay, I need some more help, and I've gotten better at it over the years, just asking for help. But I made a list of who I thought were the most influential people in the scene in Orlando. A lot of them I already knew and I already worked with, but one name that kind of stuck out was Eric Jacobson, the cellist from Brooklyn Rider, conductor for the Knights, and the new music director for the Orlando Philharmonic. I'm like, man, I should just ask him something, you know? I mean, he's bound to be able to have some influence on what we're doing. So I wrote him an email. His email is just on his website. Cool guy. And I said, hey, like, we're doing this. I need a cellist for this piece. We're doing this concert of, like, bang on a can associated musicians in December 4th. So, like, we have a big piece by Steve Reich. We have Julia Wolf, Michael Gordon, and then pieces by my friend John Alvarez, who started the festival with me and died last year. So I need a cellist. And he's like, I'll do it. I'm like, oh, okay. Whoa. Well, that was easy. I sent you one email, and now I've got, like, probably the best possible musician I could have asked, in Orlando to come and do this. Like, it was kind of amazing. And I think that if you are sincere and if you walk the walk a little bit, then people will be willing to help you out. I've had tons and tons and tons of people help me out. Like, it's not just me toiling away. Like, my wife does a ton of work. She does the website, and another friend of mine, a writer in Orlando, is doing all of our media stuff, like press releases and blog posts. And I've had tons of volunteers, and even just the very first year of the festival, like, it would not have happened without Pat Green from, at the time he was working at Urban Rethink. Now he's the director of the curator of the Avalon Gallery downtown. He basically made it happen. Like, he was as crucial to it happening as me. So if you want to get something started, just go out and talk to people. You can't do it over social media. I guess you can send an email and something cool will happen, but talk to people and see what they want to do. And if you have to start small, start small. That's what I would say. Anybody could get something going. So I think that more people should start doing it. More and more people are doing it. There's a huge entrepreneurship thing happening broadly in the country. Obviously, there's a big buzz around tech startups and stuff, but that's finally starting to infiltrate the art space. And music, as we know, is the last. It lags behind a lot of other areas in terms of advancement, I think. So, but it's finally starting to catch up to music too, and there's some things I'd love to talk about related to that. So.
Yeah, that's great. Then let's maybe talk about some of the events that you have scheduled for this coming Accidental Music Festival season. And the first one is just a couple of weeks away in October 29 at the Plaza Theater. Is Yarn? Do they say Yarn Wire or Yarn/Wire?
Yarn Wire.
Okay, so Yarn Wire is a piano percussion quartet, the Bartok Sonata for 2 piano and percussion, and they are playing music by Sam Pluta, David Bird, Steve Reich, and Joseph DePonio. So tell us a little bit about these concerts that you have coming up, starting with Yarn Wire.
Sure. So Yarn Wire, I wanted to bring them down last year. Composer Joe DePonio, who was our composer in residence last year for the festival, he wrote a piece for oboe and electric guitar and electronics that my wife and I, in our duo, Belt and Ramirez, we performed that at the Dr. Phillips Center last year. That's the new Performing Arts Center in Orlando. So Joe introduced us to Yarn Wire and some other folks that he wanted to bring down who had played his music before. That's how I got introduced to them. And it didn't work out for last year, but I really wanted to make sure that we kept in touch, and we just kept emailing each other and found a date that worked. And I'm really excited. I mean, they're incredible. They've covered so much repertoire. They've been together for 10 years now. So all the, if you can call it standard repertoire for that ensemble, like, they've got it. And they've commissioned, they commission a ton of new composers every year. And they're just completely committed to what they do. They're like exceptional players, and I think that they have really big ears and broad taste in styles. Just working, they're going to play Steve Reich and Joe DePonio. Nobody, Joe's not super well known, but his music couldn't be further from like the minimalist thing or post-minimalist. He's just in a totally different direction. They've done works by Tristan Perrick and Tristan Marai. Like, it could not be a broader, what they're doing. So it's very, very exciting. And, I want to bring artists of that caliber to Orlando to kind of show people like what the level is, Do you
when you listen to these artists that are performing this huge diversity of music, is that something that's important to you in the programming? Because I feel like a lot of the the performances that I hear about and that get the most attention generally are the kind of very accessible, and not in a bad way, just as a feature of the music, is a lot of groove-oriented minimalism and post-minimalism that doesn't have a lot of diversity within it. You know, the kind of indie classical kind of thing that we mentioned earlier is the thing that I feel like gets the most press and leaves out a lot of really interesting and adventurous and creative music.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think that stuff is important. I think it's important to play the accessibility. Okay, that's the key question here. And I think that in the case of a group like Yarnwire, they specifically make it their mission to make difficult repertoire accessible. Now, what does that mean? Is it like dumbing it down? Are they going to rearrange something? Are they going to add, like, you know, synth pads behind everything or whatever? Like, or put it behind a video game projection or something?
Yeah.
No. The idea is, if you are committed to the music that you're doing, and you think about the best way to present it, you think about a way that you can play this for somebody that's hearing it for the first time and maybe the last time. I'm kind of paraphrasing something that Russell from Yarnwire said. Then you can do it in a way that makes it compelling. I mean, the main thing is just don't do shitty music. As long as you do stuff that's good, you can get away with programming really dense or very sparse spectral stuff or whatever you want. I think that what you're saying, there's some truth to the fact that artists like I don't want to name too many names, but
No, I don't. I'm not trying to call anybody out.
Yeah, yeah. But like it is an easy narrative to sell with the indie classical thing. It's really easy to write that story for the New York Times, where
The rock crossover thing.
Yeah, and it's I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that a lot of people that are listening to quote unquote indie music, if you go back 10 or 15 years where the music on the internet was like still paid for to some extent, or it was just maybe you couldn't find every single thing that you wanted, and people were still like a little bit more actively searching, and record stores hadn't completely tanked or whatever. The idea of in indie music is people were listening to that because it sounded different, and they were looking for different sounds. It was accessible because it was popular music, but it wasn't what we consider accessible as people working in contemporary classical music versus what the average, I don't want to say average person, but person who's outside of this scene, what they consider accessible is so different. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's important to play a variety. Like, that was the question, right?
I like the don't do shitty music rule, or its inverse, do excellent music or whatever.
Absolutely.
And because I think that's something that is really at the core of it, is that it's very easy to make that kind of groove music over and over again for a long time, and I think we've all been subjected to mediocre performances of more challenging repertoire, and that is going to turn anybody off of any repertoire for a long time, is if you go to hear a challenging piece and it's just not performed very well. I feel like you can get away with a so-so performance of In C in a way that you can't get away with a so-so performance of something that is a lot, well, just more difficult to listen to.
Yeah.
And the groups that do it really well, like Yarnwire or like Eighth Blackbird, do both the really, really out stuff and the really straight ahead indie kind of stuff, and they do them both really, really well. And to me, that's the value of those kinds of groups, and the value of this kind of performance is putting something, like Joseph DeBonio and Steve Reich and Sam Pluta on the same program.
Well, what's frustrating to me is, we touched on this briefly, is that these groups that do very groove-oriented, quote, indie classical or whatever, it seems like the media outlets never get tired of writing stories about that as if it's something new. They'll write a story every couple months about that as if there's some new ground being broken by doing this. And be honest, this kind of crossover thing where you're very self-consciously referencing straight-ahead kind of groove, or even self-consciously referencing actual pop music genre stuff, has been going on since the 1980s in art music. So there's nothing new about it. It's just something that they know that when their listeners or when their readers hear the music, they're going to go, oh yeah, I can dig that. And that's why they write the story.
I think there's a lot of truth to that, and it's the newspaper game. Like, you're trying to get clicks. You need to get click-throughs. So if your article about this contemporary music ensemble can work in the name of a pop star or some indie darling or whatever, like, you now have an article that sells ads. And if you just are writing about obscure composers and there's no hook to it, like, you're not going to sell any ads. Like, nobody's going to click on that thing. So I think that that's one of the things that makes it necessary in the eyes of music critics. But I used to think that the New York Times was just like giving everybody a pass, but like recently I've noticed that they're not. Like they're still they're critical. They're still critical of things that we're talking about when it comes across as shallow or it's not effectively performed or whatever. They're not afraid to say those things. So
yeah,
necessary evil, man.
There are some real music critics out there still. Most notably recently, Anne Majette. Dave knows what I'm talking about. She brought the hammer down on an opera. Was it an opera? No, it was the premiere concert of something. But anyway, search her out if you want to find a music critic who really brings the hammer down on somebody. She does.
She's at the Washington Post, right?
Yeah. Washington Post. I'm really excited about the Vicky Chow performance of Tristan Parrish piece that he wrote for her, if I'm reading this right. 40 channel 1-bit electronics titled Surface Image. And we've interviewed Tristan twice on the show and let him know that we're disappointed he's settled for only 40 channels. What's he thinking?
The piece is so good.
I made my students listen to it a few weeks ago, and they all really dug it.
Hell yeah! And I've heard a bunch of his music, and I like it. And we had a piece of his played at the festival last year. We did this big percussion thing at Will's Pub, this alternative music venue. It's an indie venue, so we did our indie classical show there, and Tristan Parrish, his piece killed. Like, the audience was completely mesmerized, and they loved it. And, I like his music, but when I heard Surface Image, I was like, this is another level for him. Like, in terms of the depth, the emotional depth, that's the thing that sometimes I think gets lost in post-minimalism, I think, and then gets brought maybe too much to the fore in the indie classical thing. So I think that he just made a great piece of music that, will be played many, many times and deserves to be played and heard as much as possible. So I was thrilled that we were able to make that work.
Yeah,
it's going to be crazy.
And in terms of the festival itself, I mean, Vicky Chow, big name, good for you. Tristan Parrish, big name, good for you. So I think that can only up your stock price.
Yeah, well, coming back to that idea of how do you start something, and where is it? Where are you living?
Florence, Alabama. Think if you know what Muscle Shoals, Alabama is.
Sure.
We're the sister city of Muscle Shoals.
Okay. So, people would ask me, how did you guys get Deerhoof? How did you get this orchestra? Like, how did you get the Symphonic Orchestra of Guanajuato? How do you get Vicky Chow? Pay them.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the way that you do it. If you offer people money, then they might do stuff. That's the number one thing. So, and you're not talking about like Jay-Z or Beyonce level checks that you have to cut. It's like it's not a huge amount of money, but you have to work at it. You have to work at it every day, and ask a million people a million questions and keep chipping away at it. But having done this now, like we're going into our 5th season, and I'm about to start programming for next year. It's worth it. It's definitely worth it to learn a little bit about business and learn Excel. I don't know how much time you guys spend making spreadsheets, but
yeah,
make so many spreadsheets.
Yeah, like learning all those skills are valuable. If you're going to be a musician or just a broader part of this like freelance economy, which I really think that hasn't peaked. I think more and more people are, getting tiny houses and living out of trailers and, making $60,000 a year from their laptop while they drive around the country. Like, I think that kind of lifestyle of working for yourself is more and more possible.
Absolutely.
And I think it's really, really important for musicians, especially when you're faced with like, okay, am I going to go get a DMA, or am I going to try to make it as a professional right now? And that's what, we all face at some point. Like, when do I stop going to school? And what am I going to do when I'm not in school anymore? I personally, like, I've done both things. Like, I've taught, I used to teach at Full Sail University, and I taught guitar lessons for like 10 years. And then I've done like wedding gigs and stuff like that. And I just kind of have gotten to a point now where I would rather work on the festival and figure out how to make money a little bit, to make it pay for itself, and then maybe pay myself a little bit, which I've still never paid myself $1 after 5 years. But I have loaned quite a bit of money to the festival, and I think I paid myself back. So I haven't made $1, but I'm square now.
Yeah.
So learning how to do that, I mean, I think that's what I really want to do. I don't want to go back to the academy, if you will, and like big ups to anybody who wants to do it. It's just like I'm trying to stake out this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it would be nice if the academy would learn how to prepare musicians for the world you're describing.
Exactly.
So instead of just assuming, well, you're going to have to get 3 degrees to have any chance of getting a job teaching, music appreciation in Ochre Patch, Missouri, you need a doctorate.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane.
Yeah.
It's totally insane right now how many people who are highly qualified and who, like, it's a bubble, the same way that housing was a bubble, Like, we told all these people that they'd be able to buy houses and, no money down, and we'll give you financing, and then they all lost their houses. And it's the same thing happening in education, where it's like you need a doctorate. If you're going to go into classical music, you have to get a doctorate. Now, tons and tons of people have doctorates or ABD and can't get a goddamn job, like, any better than they could have if they hadn't even started down that route. So, I mean, that's really tough. It's really, really tough.
Yep, and they'd have less student loan debt.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
I think we all know that language.
You're preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So something really exciting about the festival for this year that I wanted to talk about is the new, I guess you would call it, resident ensemble, the Ensemble AMF.
Yeah, absolutely. This is has been one of our goals from the very beginning, to establish a permanent new music ensemble in Orlando. So in the first year, we did an ad hoc group, a chamber orchestra comprised of some graduate students, some principals from the Orlando Phil, just some professional musicians from around town. But it never like coalesced around a particular lineup, and I got away from commissioning works and got more into presenting existing ensembles, and that was largely for financial reasons. It's easier to market an ensemble that has already created all of their marketing materials and has recordings and video and press. So that's why I kind of went in that direction. But we're finally now in a position where I can do this thing that I've always wanted to do, which is create a permanent new music ensemble in Orlando. And hopefully, next year we'll have a full season. This year we've got the performance in December where we're playing 2x5 by Steve Reich, which is for like double rock ensemble, kind of indie classical. And then Lick by Julia Wolf, which is a really, really cool piece for a kind of variation on that rock ensemble. And then Michael Gordon's Low Quartet, which is just really fun. And it was one of my friend, our co-founder, John Alvarez, it was one of his favorite pieces. And he showed that to me, and he would just like, just vibe out when he was listening to that. So I thought that would be a great piece to include on this. It's also just a week after his birthday, so we're kind of just celebrating. That whole concert actually is in honor of John, and we're going to donate proceeds to two charities. One is called it's called Suicidology, and they study why people commit suicide and do outreach and prevention activities. And then the other one is, I believe it's called the Reason Foundation or Reason Project or something like that. And they advocate for secular values and public policy. And those were, that was like, besides music, the most important thing to John. So yeah, so I'm really excited about the lineup. We've got great musicians, and we're going to do something in the spring called Marathon AMF. David knows a little bit about this, but Ensemble AMF will perform at Marathon AMF, and the whole idea is to do a full day of these kind of half-hour sets, so maybe 10 or 12 half-hour sets of contemporary music. Some will be by existing ensembles, some will be ad hoc groups, and what I'm really hoping for is that this will be something that catalyzes another wave of growth. The way that in 2011 all these things started happening, I'm hoping that 2015 and 16 is another incubation period where we get more professional, more permanent ensembles. So, yeah, that's what it's all about, man. Just building up that ecosystem.
Yeah, I really like the way you're defining success, and where you already covered how at first you might have had an idea of the only way to equal success is to do twice as big the next year. But I think the way you're talking about it now, it seems like a more meaningful and more meaningful, not only just personally, but more meaningful artistically, way to go about things.
Mm-hmm. And also, like, culturally, you're helping, like, you use the word incubation of like fostering these groups and trying to build a habitat for people to keep making what they make and keep going and keep developing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, part of why we started the festival was just a conversation I had with my guitar professor. There was a composer, Juan Trigos, and he was living in Orlando. The guy's an amazing composer and conductor. Now he's the director of the Oaxaca Symphony in Mexico. He's the conductor for the Eastman Broadband Ensemble, and a recording that they made was like it was the first runner-up for a Pulitzer. I mean, like he's a friggin' serious musician, and he was living in Orlando, for some reason. Like his father lived there, so he moved there for a while. And so my guitar professor said, like, there needs to be a reason for people of that level to stay there. And that's something that resonated with me. I'm like, the quality of life in Orlando is fantastic. The natural beauty is amazing. The food scene is great. Like, there's so many things. Like, whatever you want is there, except for the way that we felt about it, except for like really interesting contemporary art music. So it's like, well, if we know that and nobody's doing anything about it, then it's kind of incumbent upon us, right? So yeah.
Why do contemporary art music people feel like they need to suffer through winters in New York? When you can have
Man, we're gearing up for it. It totally sucks. Like, it was summer was kind of long here, and we're like, man, I'm ready for fall. I'm ready for winter. And everybody got their wish this week, and we want to take it all back. I mean,
it got down into the 70s here in Orlando this week, and everybody was all bundled up.
And this is every week Punch Dave for.
It was 59 degrees outside when I got up this morning, so I actually have house slippers and a hoodie on.
Yeah, right. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I just think that wherever you are, like, you can make something happen. Like, look at what Big Ears Festival.
Yeah.
Knoxville. And it's the biggest thing. It's the biggest thing happening.
That's not very far away from me, actually. I'm inspired, damn it.
There's so much to do.
No, I love that. I love that idea that you contribute to this like ecosystem and give people a reason to make more things. Well, hey, if Accidental Music Festival can be successful in Orlando, then maybe something else can be successful at other times, doing similar kinds of interesting cultural, projects, whether that's music or theater or dance or whatever. I think that's really exciting and a great way to think about it. It's almost like there's this cultural terrarium of whatever metropolitan area or not metropolitan area that you're in.
Yeah. Well, I'm sitting here listening to Chris talk, and I'm switching from feeling sorry for myself to getting inspired. For instance, I met recently at an after party the conductor, music director, also a composer of the Huntsville Symphony, which is the biggest, best symphony around.
Vida.
Yeah.
Gregory Vida, right? He's amazing.
Yeah, and I met him, and we talked, and we got along fine, and that might be enough to get him to look at an email that I send him proposing something or other. And who knows, maybe the same way that cellist said, okay, maybe I'll get, some sort of immediate acquiescence out of him. You never know. So I am feeling inspired, Chris. Thank you very much.
We haven't had Eric Jacobson on the show, but we've had his brother Colin on the show before, talking about Brooklyn Writer stuff.
Way back.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah, I knew Eric was going to get the gig, I have to say. When they were doing...
I was really excited to read it.
Yeah, nice. Well, when we had 6 finalists for the Orlando Philharmonic music directorship, and Eric was on there, I'm like, they already know it's going to be him. Like, it was going to be between him and Alondra De La Parra because they had the biggest connection with Orlando, but Brooklyn Writer had been there several times and done educational outreach. They always did like a residency when they stayed in Winter Park. I'm like, this guy knows the community and cares about it. And I was just like, I was so happy that he got the gig.
Yeah.
And now he's like looking for a house there. He's actually going to relocate to Orlando.
Really?
It's crazy.
That's exciting. I had not heard that he was looking to make it that permanent.
It's in the Sentinel, man.
Read about music directors nowadays are like the music director in 3 orchestras that are in different continents.
Mm-hmm.
And you wonder how much attention they're really giving to the Boston Symphony when they're also the music director somewhere in Germany.
Exactly, and I think that's a huge problem. I think
it also creates. Sorry to interrupt, but it creates the same problem you were talking about before of people not getting really involved in the community and people not being able to get into being a music director because there's these people that are really high level taking 6 music director positions, and that means some other excellent young 26-year-old hotshot conductor can't get a gig for love or money.
I think it's easier if you're the hotshot 26-year-old at this point than if you're like the tested veteran. That's at least the trend that I've seen, is that all these like 27 to 35-year-olds are getting music director positions, and that's cool. But like, I think you ought to get one.
Yeah.
That's just me. Like, LeBron James doesn't play for the Miami Heat anymore. He can't play on more than one team at a time, you know? And I think it ought to be the same way, especially for these people that are, like, really, really big names. I think it's insane that tiny municipal orchestras, but that are nonetheless professional groups, that they have to, like, keep going back to the same people. I don't know. I think that's a huge problem that needs to change.
Well, and you would think that was something that the board would care about when hiring a music director. You know, they would say, we want somebody that is going to spend time in our community and build our audience by building the community of people who are engaged and invested in this cultural activity that we do. And if you are going to maintain your music director position in this other city that's 1,000 miles away, then you're not going to be able to devote the time and the energy to our community. And when I say our community, I don't mean the 80 people that show up for orchestra rehearsal. I mean the community of people that support those 80 people and are a part of the cultural livelihood of our area. And I think that's the big thing you're losing, and I would think that boards would care about that and not hire somebody unless they were going to get them more or less exclusively.
Yeah, I mean, the job descriptions that I see, I check conductor postings all the time, and not because I'm a conductor.
As a hobby?
Just as a hobby. No, because I'm interested in that side of the business. Like, I think that it's the, you know, orchestras, operas, ballet, to some extent, but really just orchestras and operas have the most visibility for classical music, and we as a subset of that, like, we're part of that that ecosystem, and so the choices that they make trickle down to even to our little niche, and I think, you know, I read the job descriptions, a lot of them say what you're saying, like, we want somebody that's going to be invested in the community. And you can kind of tell, like, how serious they are about that, because some of them will say, like, for at least 20 weeks a year. Like,
like 20 whole weeks.
20 whole weeks. I mean, come on. Like, just, you know, there's so little creativity in terms of the programming. And I think that that's really shameful at this point, because there are great seasons being booked and great performances happening, and there are some people that are really trying to revitalize it. But there's still, I guess, like in any field, like, there are still people who just are. I mean, we have the goddamn internet. You can read about what's going on everywhere. You know, you can read research reports that show that you know, putting a big Beethoven symphony and bringing in Joshua Bell on the same program, you're not going to sell significantly more tickets, you're just going to incur greater costs.
Yep.
So, like, maybe space it out, you know, and adding chamber music concerts in alternative venues and all of these things. Like, it's out there. We have research on these things that shows that they're successful. And then there are still some organizations that are, like, not paying attention. Like, nope, just business as usual. Let's just run this thing into the ground. So,
but I think that's why independent projects like Accidental Music Festival are so important. Even if the Orlando Philharmonic did not hire a hip new music chamber performer as their music director, or perhaps even if they didn't, that would make Accidental Music Festival even that much more important. I think it's really great that you're doing that and inspiring that kind of culture in places that it didn't exist. And I hope that people that are listening to this who are in similarly kind of, I hate to say culturally remote, but you know, I don't know, Sam, how would you describe the land of Florence, Alabama culturally?
Very inside baseball. Like you know, it's the sister city to Muscle Shoals, which is legendary for the recording industry. So you would think that there would be a very active music scene with lots of opportunities for like bar musicians, as an example. But no, it's very like a certain few people get to play all those gigs, and there are no venues. It's the most amazing thing. There isn't a venue within 50 miles of where I'm sitting that has more personality than a middle school cafeteria and will hold more than like 100 people. It's depressing.
Well, that's why things like Accidental Music Festival are so important. So thank you for all the work that you do for that, Chris. It's wonderful for the community that I live in and inspiring to people in other communities.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that, and I guess the last thing that I'll say about that is, you know, even at the first year of Accidental Music Festival, during a performance, one of the performers, he's like probably one of the best saxophonists in the world, and he's just a guy in Orlando who used to do like tons of theme park gigs. Like, so we had this, the theme parks used to employ hundreds of amazing musicians, and then they kind of gutted their live music in favor of a bunch of Hollywood musicians who went in, recorded backing tracks, and just put all those musicians out of work. So we had this huge infrastructure of amazing talent, and so this guy, he's playing and improvising. He's doing like a free jazz set, and he's like, "This is just so great that we get to play for an audience like this, because this city for so long has been a fucking wasteland."
Talking about Brian Smithers?
No, but that guy is a heavyweight. He is amazing. Brian Smithers, like, I had the privilege of working with him at Full Sail, and I have the utmost respect for him.
I heard him play Subotnik last year, and it was incredible.
Hell yeah. I heard him play it too. Not last year, but yeah, I mean, that guy can play anything. He can play Dixieland on clarinet and then play Morton Subotnik. He plays Iwi, like, any style of music. He sounds great. He sounds great on Mozart. Like, that guy is a hell of a player. And there are a lot of musicians in town like that in Orlando, and who have felt for the longest time that they were living in a cultural wasteland. So you never know who's out there in Florence, Alabama, that like really wants a place to play and showcase what they're doing. You know,
well,
go for it.
Go ahead, Sam.
The other really inspiring thing is that my current composition students feel the same way as I do. They want something to happen around here. So I've got sort of an army of constituents to help me, so we'll see what happens.
Well, everybody should go to accidentalmusicfestival.com and check out their season and buy tickets, because the tickets, by the way, I should also say, are very reasonably priced for this level of performance and this kind of repertoire.
Absolutely. And real briefly, a little bit of sad news this last week. Speaking of awesome saxophone players, Phil Woods, who about 3 weeks ago announced he was retiring, then shortly thereafter passed away. So great saxophone player, laid down one of the best pop music saxophone solos in the history of pop music saxophone solos on Just the Way You Are by Billy Joel. So you should go listen to that and realize that he improvised that thing. It's just amazing.
Also, happy trails this week to the Gotham Chamber Opera, which was doing a lot of good, creative, small-scale opera work in New York City, which is now that we've lost Gotham Chamber Opera and New York City Opera, we're pretty much down to just the Met in New York and some things that are even smaller than the Gotham Chamber Opera. So happy trails to another New York opera institution. And with that sad news, we're going to leave it as a show. Before we go, actually, is there anything else that you want to plug, Chris?
I'm not plugging any of my own projects other than the hour of just self-reference that we just had. But there are some really cool things, like just to kind of build upon this entrepreneurship and music thing that we've been talking about. One company that's really, really exciting, maybe you guys have heard of, it's called Group Muse. You guys heard of Group Muse?
Yeah.
So for those who haven't heard of it, basically it's the Uber of having chamber music concerts in your house. And so on one side there are people that want to host chamber music concerts at home, and then on the other side there are artists who want to play at these things.
They're based out of Boston, right?
They're based in New York and Boston. I think the CEO is living in New York now. But it's fantastic. I've played at a couple of them, and you know, it's I think a completely vital thing. I think it's growing the audience for chamber music. It's growing the economic viability of being a chamber music duo. My wife and I have gotten paid consistently at both of the group music events we've played at, and they're expanding to other cities. So maybe that's something that you guys can look at. Like, well, we need group music in Florence, Alabama. Maybe we can start that. And let's see. I thought I had one other one, but I think that's good for now. Oh,
All
no, I did have one other one about opera. There's a new opera company, Apotheosis. They're doing like large-scale opera in New York, but in English. So masterworks, but translated into English. So one group passes, another comes to fruition or something.
It's the cycle of opera life.
It's the circle of life, as a great American philosopher once wrote. So that's going to do it for this week's episode of SoundNotion. Thank you so much, Chris, for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. I hope this is usable.
Oh, it's great. It's great.
Yeah.
We just dropped the whole thing straight in because this is live to tape here on SoundNotion. Mostly because I don't want to edit it. You can find links to Accidental Music Festival and all the other projects that we spoke about this week on our show notes, which are available at soundnotion.tv/SN, and you will see links to all the things that we spoke about. If you'd like to comment on any of the things that we spoke about, you can leave a comment there. You can also find us on Twitter. We're at SoundNotion on Twitter, and we're also on Facebook. And you know, we're not on Snapchat yet, but you know, maybe someday. So we'd love to continue these conversations with you wherever you are, and we are here every week or so at soundnotion.tv. So please take a moment and subscribe to this show and get these downloaded automatically to your favorite podcasting listening device. And if you like the show, or even if you don't, go into the iTunes store and leave us a review. That helps us out a lot. Thank you so much for watching or listening, and we will see you back next week.
Bingo, bango, bongo.